if you're a new biotech company, we are not necessarily, Canada is not the best place to find investment. You're always going to be looking outside. You're especially looking across the border to the US, trying to find funding. And once a company has gotten to the next level, we still make it more of a challenge, let's say, for small Canadian companies to really be able to scale up. It's just, we haven't put the emphasis on life sciences as being an engine of our economy, not as much as cars, for example. So, you got to take a look at where the value lies and really put your effort behind it. And we've just not made that same effort that other regions, especially an emerging region like China, has done. Hey everybody, I'm Kostas.
And I'm Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE. Today we got a very special episode, and it's just me and Costa. So we're just double teaming this and no guests on, but we're going to talk about something that is very, very kind of top of mind and very topical. So Costas recently just came back from Bio Europe, and we're going to talk a little bit about the biotech landscape, at least from his visit to Bio Europe. So maybe starting off, Costas, maybe let the audience know, the billions of people, of course, that are watching, what is Bio Europe?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are probably very familiar with Bio, the standalone in the U.S. It takes place in Boston every year, and people are familiar with that. This is the European equivalent. So fundamentally, it's an opportunity for biotech companies to get together. There's a conference portion, right? There are presentations from podiums, but to be honest, it's very lightly attended from a conference standpoint. The reason to go is for people to get together to make deals, right? So there's a lot of smaller companies, service companies that are offering that, their service, whether it's clinical trials management or early development work. But the real reason is for looking for partners, right? Trying to get investments, trying to license products out. And the bio meetings really are sort of that big opportunity to do some speed dating, to find new potential licensing opportunities or find new potential investors. And that's really the crux of the meeting, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I like how you kind of the analogy is like speed
Yeah.
dating for companies in the life sciences. So that's biotech, big pharma, and just everything in between.
Yep. You actually, it's really well run. I have to give it to them. They've got it down to like the science, right? So once you register, you get onto this platform, you find people you want, and you send them invitations, right? And if they swipe right, so to speak, and they go like, yeah, I want to talk to these folks, then the platform actually finds like a physical spot, whether it's a booth or a table or something in the meeting, and gives you the time, and it just the platform manages it all, so you basically have very little to do from an administrative standpoint. You just need to figure out who do you want to talk to, and hopefully they're interested in you as well, and then you just basically arrive, you sit down, and you have your discussions. So super efficient way to meet a lot of people very quickly and get introductions to new products and companies.
Awesome, awesome. So I assume you spoke to a bajillion people. I don't think that's actually a real number, but
Yeah.
what were some of your takeaways? Some of the big themes that you took away from these conversations, or just in general from this meeting? And I think when was the meeting? The meeting was a couple of weeks ago, right? Like,
So it was the first week of November in Vienna. So had lots of schnitzel. Lovely, lovely little town, especially that time of the year. Just the sun, a little coolness in the air, perfect for having these meetings. Yeah, no, there were really two big takeaways that I think. One that I was really happy to see, and the other one surprised me a little bit, I have to say. So the first one was um, the investors are back, right? Deal making is back. For a number of years, we felt it, back in the Exactus days, and I think many people out there running biotechs who were just, hanging on by a thread, trying to find investors, trying to find ways to continue to operate their businesses, weather the sort of financial storm, so to speak. Uh, it, the investors are back. They're really looking to find now the gems and to bring the money back to the table. I think that's great news for biotech. It's sort of sputtered a little while, but this was good news. Everyone I spoke to, I don't think I spoke to anyone who said like, yeah, there's nobody out there, nobody wants to talk, nobody's really looking at making serious investments. If you have something viable, they are looking to bring that money and make it work again. So I think that was the first big insight for me, and very, as I said, very much a positive signal for the entire biotech landscape. The second thing, which surprised me a little bit, is how far China has come. So there were a lot of Chinese companies there, and we had the opportunity to speak to either the companies directly themselves or the sort of North American, mostly U.S. based folks that are working on their behalf to get their products into the rest of the world. These are companies that, I think the first wave of these companies and some of the current companies are basically taking older products, kind of repackaging them, repurposing them. And that's okay. Like that's not really the biggest news, and it certainly isn't going to make a huge impact in most cases. But the interesting thing is when you have companies that are starting to innovate, they're very quickly moving products through the development phases. I think one of the stories I heard was that there is a city that was built in China specifically dedicated to doing phase 1 studies. Right, so this is early healthy volunteers. You're really trying to understand the pharmacodynamics of the and pharmacokinetics of the product, going into humans. It's really the early fundamental work. Takes a lot of blood work. Really tight schedules. Here in North America, you're typically doing that in a hospital setting. Um, so but it just shows you the amount of investment that they are making in their life science industry to just rocket it through. These products are largely currently tested in China, so they're doing large phase 3 studies, larger than most of the phase 3s we would do. They're only being done in Chinese patients, and then they're getting approval from the Chinese FDA. And their sort of next step is trying to find partners to come and get data in other markets, so Europe and the US predominantly, so that they can make their subsequent submissions to the FDA and EMA. But I'll tell you, like they are super aggressive. They've done a ton of background work, and in some cases, I think I'd even sort of question: do you even need that additional non-Chinese patient, data, depending on the mechanism of action and the indication that you're going after. The mechanism may not actually need it, and it's reflected in the fact that some of these products are now being approved in the US as well as in Europe. There's not a lot of them, but they're being approved without additional data in their data package. So to me, those are the two big themes that I took away: is the sort of real emergence of China and money coming back to biotech.
Wow, that's awesome to hear. One definitely, I guess it's not that surprising around the rise of China, at least and it seems like in the life science biotech space. It seems like China is rising in every
Yeah.
sector, right? But the investors coming back, like maybe like I guess that does surprise me a little bit. And just pulling on that thread, the reason why I bring that up is, does anyone talk about? Did you hear anything about sort of the, let's say, the changes in the U.S. landscape, at least from a seems like a regulatory perspective? Does that not scare off investors? Like, why are it seems like things are more uneasy. So it
Mm.
surprises me a little bit that investors are jumping back right in. So what was your sense of that? Do they just not care?
Yeah, no. From a regulatory perspective, I think everyone is I didn't hear any concern that things are going to be delayed, or that there isn't the expertise there anymore to really assess new files going in. So I don't think it's that side. It's from a pricing standpoint, there was a ton of concern. I can tell you that. This most favored nation concept, and for those who aren't familiar with it, the United States, and I don't know if it's just through an executive order or not, have basically requested that anything that is going to be funded through Medicare is going to have to be the lowest price, full stop. Right. So if you think traditionally what it looked like, US tended to be one of the highest price markets in the world. The reality that most people don't know is that that's just the list price, and almost every insurer, almost every person in the United States would pay a lower price than what is the list price. But that was never that's not public, right? So you wouldn't know what the real price is, and that real price, net of all the discounts, tended to be closer to what Europeans were paying. Um, but now this requires that they list transparently the price and that it is the lowest price. And they are asking for transparency. This is the US asking for transparency into the deals cut in other markets. So, for example, here in Canada, you know, PMPRB approves a price. It's based on a basket of other countries, and it's the highest price you can charge. You go through all the steps, and you end up at PCPA, which is the sort of the pricing negotiating stage in Canada. And at that point, you negotiate something that includes typically, and to be perfectly honest, typically some sort of a rebate and potentially a cap, so that the total cost is actually managed at that step. All of those agreements are not transparent. They are confidential, held by the company. You do not send them out to anyone else. The US is requesting that whether it's in Canada or the UK or France or wherever the deal is, that it is fully transparent. Great for the US, but what that means is all the other countries that depend on the US as one of their basket countries to keep the price higher now have to come down. And what's going to end up happening is one of two things. Older products are probably going to come down in price, which is not the end of the world. Newer products are probably going to come up in price rest of the world. There's going to probably be a hard line where they're going to try to balance it out, because if you can't give up the US, one of the largest markets. So that concept of, well, we have a license in the rest of the world and we're trying, in Europe, and we're trying to get it into the US market. Now the question is, well, what price is going to end up in the US? Or if you're a US company and you're trying to get a product into market in Europe, now you got to figure out, well, what am I willing to accept in Europe in order not to upset the price that I have achieved in the US. So this complex, very very complex discussion, and we should actually a specific episode on this. We should have somebody on board to really go through the details and minutia of this, because it's going to change the way that pricing is done worldwide. But that was a discussion in almost every meeting that we had. There was some sort of discussion of how do you manage MFN, or most favored nation pricing.
And that's very, very interesting because these intricacies are really you don't think of them necessarily when you're a patient or someone that's taking you being treated, but it does matter a lot, because I can even think of a scenario where a organization that has a drug, say it's a really great drug that cures, I don't know, some form of cancer, and it's like a $500,000, and say the US is willing to pay that, insurers are willing to pay that, and say Canada or another nation that's much smaller is only willing to pay 100,000, and they just basically go tell us to pound sand because they're like, well, we might as well, like, you have a tenth of the population and you're willing to pay only a quarter of what this country that's 10 times your size willing to pay, so we rather just take their business as opposed to your business, right? Is that like a potential scenario that could actually come about here?
Yeah. So we actually had discussions. I was wearing two hats. One, I was sort of wearing our what's with RWE hat, actually talking to people and trying to get a sense of what was happening in the meeting, and their what the feeling was. But on the other hand, also working for someone trying to look at bringing new products into Canada. So some of those discussions, that was actually the number one question: is can you manage price across the board? Because if you can't, we're not coming to Canada. And it may be a different story for larger pharma where they're doing trials here in Canada, and so they've got sort of a moral obligation to bring that product here. But if you are a small company with a looking at a rare disease, you have a small market, and the U.S. is going to be your make or break. It's how you're going to determine if your company succeeds in the longer term. You are not going to come to Canada. You have no. Oftentimes, they're not even doing the trials in Canada at some of these smaller companies, right? So, yes, it is the scenario that Canada will lose out on drugs if we can't manage that cross-border pricing question, and it's just gotten so much harder now than it was even a year ago before
Yeah.
MFN came into play.
Wow. I would say, we're definitely going to talk about Canada, but following still along lines of the investors coming back, you said a specific word. You said they're looking for gems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the biotech space in general, so more specifically developing drugs, it's one of those things where it's like a big bet, right?
Yeah,
It's there's a whole bunch of companies trying to develop something, and like one survives out of 100. I'm just
yeah,
making those numbers up, but it's probably not actually that far off, right? So in the past, I assumed it was more like you have to try a whole bunch of different things, but now
yes.
people, it seems like people are not doing that. People are much more looking at being much more, let's say, rigorous, or the diligence is higher. Is that your sense that they're really looking for those gems? It's not like they're funding everyone; they're funding
Yeah.
very particular things right now.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences is that these are drugs that tend to be far more mechanistically targeted, right? So, I mentioned rare disease. There's a lot of rare disease stuff being done, and even in when you talk about something like oncology, you are super targeting patient populations now. So the mechanism that you are testing is far more aligned to the underlying disease mechanism. So your probability of success is higher. There's always, the AEs and things like that can derail you. But I think because of the kinds of mechanisms and how they're aligning them to the indications, their probabilities are different than they were in the past. It's not sort of a scattershot sort of approach. Let's take, we like this mechanism. We'll also try another mechanism or two somewhere in our pipeline, and then we're going to take some two or three products forward in phase one. They'll just start dropping out. These companies are using much fewer resources. They're far more targeted. They're leaner in terms of how they conduct a lot of this work. So it's a much easier bet, and it's much easier to find, let's say, the gems than it used to be, because you were making a lot of big bets and hoping that one paid off as a blockbuster, as opposed to making you know potentially smaller bets in a company that is very lean, using your dollars wisely, and will create a nice valuable um, pipeline or a nice valuable result, but is not necessarily going to be a blockbuster. So I think those are the differences. The big entrenched pharmas, they're looking for blockbusters. The investors are looking for the gems that they can invest relatively a smaller amount for a nice return. And it doesn't have to be a blockbuster $1 billion, $10 billion return at that point.
Got it, got it. And then now maybe stepping into the China discussion.
Yeah.
So when investors look at China, maybe two categories of investors. Those investors that you said that, let's say, their day to day isn't necessarily to make drugs, right? But they're trying
Mm-hmm.
to gain a return on their investment, right? How
Yeah.
do they approach China versus, say, big pharma approaches China? Does big pharma still look at the the kind of the big hits in China, or do they take a slightly different approach in China? I guess the question is like, what is their approach
Yeah.
towards China?
Yeah, so I think big pharma is still looking for the big blockbusters, right? So they're still trying to find, you know, the big new next mechanism or that they can pull out and globalize, right? Because there's a lot of work, as we said, that's already being done locally. I'm not sure if a lot of it is already being supported by the government, and so there's less risk there. The question is, at some point they got to step in and globalize the program. So that's their approach. It's a little bit different though than, looking at a company who has already, got to phase 3 in China and potentially is on the market in China, but doesn't have the wherewithal to come to Europe or North America, especially if they need to have additional data done. So, from an investment standpoint, you're looking at companies who are saying, we see value here. We're willing to take the risk to do these additional studies. And they're typically sort of those smaller, medium sized pharmas that have the mechanisms in place already to manage these registrational clinical trials, have the regulatory arms ready to go that can actually take the existing data and marry it with the newer data sets to be able to successfully submit and achieve access in sort of outside of China. So those are two different types of investors or two different types of or sizes of pharma companies that are going in and looking for products. That was my what I saw. As I said, there's a lot of Me Too's, a lot of sort of repurposing of older assets. Um, those are more the generic folks that are looking for a different spin to win in, in the generic space, in hospital purchasing and things like that. But that that's a very different market than I think the innovative market that we typically deal with.
Got it, got it. And do you find that, say, investors from Europe, investors from the US, do they? I guess they must be okay with these drugs that are being developed in China. By okay, about them, what I mean by that is that they see, hey, you know what? I'm not skeptical of it. I guess they actually there's credibility there. Is that the general sense that there's credibility behind these assets in China, and that's why they're putting in money?
Yeah, for the ones that are putting in money are seeing not just credibility but differentiation, right? So that's where the money is going. It is to, you know, I'll give you an example. There were loads and loads of PDL1s, loads and loads of GLP ones, for example, or dual mechanism GLPs. You could walk in and just buy one off the shelf if you wanted to bring it to North America, right? But how do you compete with a Keytruda that is going off patent soon, right? With just yet another PDL1. How do how do you go against a company like Eli Lilly who has just basically just bowled over the market? Are you coming in and just like undercutting? Is that the strategy? So you really have to look at who has thought about it and created something innovative, whether it's in the patient population, whether it's in, you know, really creating a unique molecule that has multiple potential ways of impacting the mechanism, really sort of fiddling with the backbone itself. So um, that's those I think are the folks that are getting the investment, and where in larger investors are really putting their money in China. If it's Me Too's, I think those folks were having a hard time having a lot of conversations with people. But the net result was we just can't market this in a Canada or Europe or US.
Interesting, interesting. So for those of you who are not familiar with those terms, the GLP-1 ones are the ligands that everyone's probably heard of already in those various weight loss drugs, right? Weight loss,
Yeah.
diabetes drugs, and then PDL1. Those are it's very particular to cancer. So this is the whole concept of immunotherapy. that's sort of revolutionized the cancer field. But speaking back to China, the like, what's your sense about why they're so good at what they're doing right now? Is it do you think is it government subsidies? Because I don't want to chalk everything up to say, hey, it's just government pounding money in. Is it government subsidies? Is it a government reducing regulations? Like, oh, they just make clinical trials easier? Or is it something just completely different? Like, what's your sense about why these Chinese companies are becoming, at least biotechs, are so much more innovative in terms of at least their output right now?
Yeah. I think it's all of the above. Uh, there's definitely, I mean, like I said, if you're building a city to be able to conduct, phase one studies, just the throughput that you will have, and the ability to kill molecules that just don't make sense is so much more different than what we can do in the rest of the world, right? So I think that's number one. Is there is a focus from the government in biotech to win biotech. Just like we look at, after COVID, we looked at it and said, shoot, we need to have some manufacturing here. We need to probably be able to take care of ourselves in the worst case event that things shut down again, right? So I think that they took it one step further and said, not only that, but we need to make this an economic winner for us. Instead of relying on other people, outside of China, we need to also be able to develop these things ourselves, and be able to create an economic engine to continue to move China forward. So I think that's number one. Regulations certainly are different in China, I think, for the most part, in terms, if you take a look, and we've had the sort of experience in Canada with ethics boards, and the slow process, and really diving into the fine details of projects. um, there certainly is oversight. I don't want to say that it's not the Wild West in China. I think that maybe there was a point in time where that was the case, but it's certainly not the same today. But the speed at which that they can review and get things done is a lot different than it is certainly in Canada, probably in Europe, and the US as well. But I think there's a third element to it. So you have a workforce. You have a very highly educated workforce of researchers and scientists. We've been lucky to have some of those folks here in North America, coming to our universities and helping to actually drive research here. And I think that there is sort of this, I can't remember the word for it, but there's this kind of resurgence in kind of like the pride of taking skills and bringing those back to China, and really being able to build something durable for that country, and for your family and your peers and your children in the future. So there is there's just this great talent pool that, on top of everything else, that when you give them the resources and you give them the environment, they're able to take advantage of it. And we saw that, both with some of the researchers we spoke to, as well as some of the commercial folks we spoke to, who are just that, just head down, just trying to get things done. So it it's those three things, I think, and anybody who has those in their environment is probably going to be set up for success.
Wow, that seems like a very, very well-oiled machine. So if I can take what you said and correct me if I'm wrong, summarizing it, the three things seem to be there's an economic drive towards supporting this sector.
Mm-hmm.
There's a regulatory kind of what's the best way to put it? A
Less red tape.
regulatory opt. Sorry.
Less red tape. Just
Well, yes, maybe less. I was going to say optimization,
sure.
but yes, less red tape. Fair enough. And then a just an incredibly talented workforce. So
Yeah.
with those three things in mind, now coming all the way across the Pacific Ocean, coming all the way landing back into Canada, like what can we do? What was the sense of Canada's presence at this meeting? Was it what you have seen in the past? Was it like comparing to the past? What was your feeling around Canada's place in this biotech ecosystem?
Yeah. There was actually a pretty big contingent this year. We had Minister Vic Fideli from Ontario there, which was good to have someone. We had a special Canada a special Canada meeting. I think it was the day before the conference started, led by Minister Fideli as well as the ambassador to Austria, Alison Grant, who was there as well. So we made actually a pretty good showing, but you know, I don't, how do I put this? We were definitely smaller than some of the other groups there. Certainly, we're not on our own turf, right? But you compare it to like Germany, who's a bit of a powerhouse, let's say, but they had a booth for every one of their regions. And yeah, I think the other thing was, what were we doing there? Were we looking to out license? Were we looking to in license? Were we looking to offer services? Certainly, we were doing a little bit of each of these things. But Europe is a big market, right? I mean, if you think of the G5, it's when you're doing the economic modeling for pharma, you're first of all thinking of the U.S. Then you're thinking of the typical G5 in Europe, which is the UK, Italy, France, Germany, and Spain, and then Japan. Those seven countries really make up the majority of revenue for a company that has a new product coming to market. So if you are not partnered up in Europe yet, you should be at a meeting like this and finding partners. If you're a small Canadian company, your first place is going to be the U.S. just across the border. Things are crazy right now, a little bit down there, so there's a lot of state of flux in terms of the regulations and pricing and all that, as we just spoke about earlier. But Europe is still there. It's stable, and it's a huge market. You need to figure out how to enter that market and how to optimize it. And if you're not going to do it, you need to go find partners. I think that there is an opportunity for more Canadians to be having these discussions at these meetings. I don't think we were quite there, at least with this meeting. But I think more broadly, the question that you asked, especially if we compare ourselves to China, are we sort of in the same spot? Um, I don't think so. I don't think we are. If you go talk to researchers, they'll tell you about our REB model, or the Research Ethics Board, which is the first step required to get authorization to conduct a study, for example, in Canada. You still have to go to every province. You still have to typically deal with each of the hospitals in a sense. You're doing contracts hospital to hospital. It takes forever, and so that's one of the things you hear all the time, and that's just one part of it. Resources. If you're a new biotech company, we are not necessarily, Canada is not the best place to find investment. You're always going to be looking outside. You're especially looking across the border to the US, trying to find funding. And once a company has gotten to the next level, we still make it more of a challenge, let's say, for small Canadian companies to really be able to scale up. It's just, we haven't put the emphasis on life sciences as being an engine of our economy, not as much as cars, for example. So you got to take a look at where the value lies and really put your effort behind it. And we've just not made that same effort that other regions, especially an emerging region like China, has done. That's my opinion. So if anybody doesn't like that, and we have comments, that's you can attribute those to me, but that's sort of been my perspective.
No, that's great. This is all about driving discussion and driving conversation, and everyone's perspective kind of really helps with that. And so specifically, I wonder, not to say what is our Canada, we need to compete with other countries, right, for business.
Yeah.
Let's maybe have that as a foundation here. And let's say we're going to compete in the life sciences. Not to say what is our uniqueness, what do we do better than others that we can really amplify, right? But was there even that type of discussion amongst, say, Team Canada, let's say amongst the minister and others, just conversation, not necessarily what is our kind of, what can we amplify, but more
Yeah.
like let's even start looking for what things we do better than others. Was there even that type of conversation that was happening, or was it a little bit kind of scattershot, like everyone was kind of doing their own thing and hopefully something great happens from just a whole bunch of little scattershots here and there?
Yeah, I think everyone's doing their own thing for the most part. I'll tell you that the one consistent message that you always hear from Canada, whether it's the federal government, right, or within the provinces, is tax benefits, right? So our shreds, for example, at a federal level, are actually quite attractive, um, but they're still not attractive enough to overcome some things, right? And that's the sad part of it. You see Quebec, who was there and had a good representation, talking about setting up in Quebec. So it's really not about, it ends up being not about, um, it's not about what do we have to offer. It's how cheap we can make it for you to come to Canada, which is one factor for sure, but it's not about driving innovation, right? It's about just attracting companies literally here and getting headcounts in province A or province B. Like there's a little bit of competitiveness for the jobs, but not a long term vision for how do you create long term sustainable IP that comes back from a revenue standpoint and accrues to Canada and to our more broadly within the life science ecosystem, right? So we don't have a single anchor Canadian pharma, right? But if you take a look, way back, we created insulin, right? So we always go back to Banting and Best. But more recently, I think it's a lot of people don't realize that Nova Nordisk came to Toronto and actually got the researcher who had done the lion's share of the work on GLP-1s, and brought her essentially into their fold. And Ozempic was a consequence of that. So one of the biggest new categories. Why couldn't Canada be the company that sort of drove that? We have cardiac centers, we have oncology research centers, but there's not a single anchored company here in Canada that takes the IP that is created there and commercializes that and creates a continuous flywheel to make a long-term investment in our ecosystem. That's what we're missing, I think, and we just don't have the incentive for that, and we just don't seem to have the ethos to create that. We're happy to phase one at the end of development or preclinical, sell that off to someone else and let someone else do that, and that's about as far as we're happy to take it.
Got it. Got it. So what I'm hearing is that in Canada, we have all the potential ingredients to create something quite special. I mean, you were just talking Benting and Best. They're the ones that discovered and actually optimized the process for actually producing insulin, right? Which is created two very small companies in the world, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, right? The two
Yeah,
largest pharma companies in the world right now, off of the backs of Canadian research, right? Not
yeah,
not to say that they didn't do a lot of work on themselves as well. So we have the ingredients. We just need to bring. It seems like we need to bring those ingredients together, but bring those ingredients together to do something. We have to have some sort of point of view, some sort of perspective that we want to go forward with, because we're just not going to beat the U.S. in capital. That's just like
yeah,
there's no point. There's no chance there. We can't beat China in like actual scale. We don't have the same population. So we have to do something else. And we have the ingredients. We just have to have a perspective on what that something else is that we can offer the world. Is kind of your sense as well? That's what that should be the discussion. And
yeah.
perhaps it wasn't had at this conference. This conference.
Well, yeah, this conference really wasn't made for it, but I think there's the time to have these conversations here in Canada is now. We've poured investment into manufacturing, to be able to have facilities to be able to create vaccines if necessary. Let's say post pandemic, but what else could be developed within those manufacturing facilities? really we need to have a pipeline. And then even beyond that, the question is, how do you go from thinking about life science sector as how many how many people are working for these companies to what is the long-term value that an innovative company that is creating IP here in Canada and holding that IP here in Canada, what value can that create for us, both in terms of jobs as well in terms of a good sustainable long-term tax base, right, that that we can actually all benefit from, as well as continuing to create, knock on, entities, whether it's, going from one anchor company to multiple biotechs that are based here in Canada. There's no reason why the sort of the Toronto region shouldn't be seen as any different than Boston, for example. We could create that here. There's no reason why that's not possible. Same with the Montreal corridor as well. So it, I think that's the conversation that we really need to have in Canada. Is it just about jobs and production facilities, or is it about IP and a long-term vision? And that's where we need to go. So, we need to have that discussion here.
Got it. Got it. Got it. So, just using your analogy in the beginning again, we just need more people to swipe right for
Yeah,
Canada, right? More
yeah,
people just to pick Canada and say, hey, you know what? That's a place that we want to do business in, and we want to build up a solid business and employ people and create great jobs in. So I know we're running up against time, so I don't want to take up more of your time. Cost, this has been great just to follow up on the Bio Europe conference. Any last words before we say bye to the audience?
yeah. The only last thing I'll say is just, again, it's my first time attending Bio Europe, and I was pleasantly surprised. How what a great job they did. I'll leave you with a couple of numbers. 5,900 professionals who were there having discussions from over 60 countries around the world. Just to tell you how many different people were there, and over 32,000 individual meetings. All those speed dates, and as I said, I have seen announcements coming out post that meeting. So there's clearly some very successful dating that happened at that meeting. So good on Bio Europe, tremendous event, and if people are looking to find partners in Europe, great opportunity for next year potentially to go and actually have those conversations.
So thank you very much. 2 thumbs up. Costas gives to Bao Europe.
For
Excellent.
sure.
So thank you very
Yeah.
much. Great conference. Thanks everyone for tuning in today for a shorter episode, but hopefully quite insightful for everyone as well. Comment, please. If you have any comments, place them down below. Like, thumbs up, and follow us on our YouTube channel. So thanks a lot, Costas. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Lester. Bye bye.